Millions watched it live. Trump leaned in, eyes sharp, and fired the words that would ignite the entire Phoenix Convention Center. "Sit down, boy." Gasps ripped through the audience like a wave crashing into silence. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. Thousands packed inside the hall seemed to stop breathing all at once, the weight of that moment pressing against the walls. This was supposed to be different. The bipartisan forum on race and leadership had been planned for months, held at the Phoenix Convention Center, designed to bring two American presidents, one current, one former, face to face for a dialogue about the country's future. But in a single sentence, everything changed. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. Every outlet had cameras locked, recording every frame, every twitch, every whisper. What nobody knew was that they were about to capture something far bigger than politics. Trump leaned back in his chair, shoulders squared, as if daring the world to react. His supporters scattered throughout the hall laughed nervously, unsure if clapping was a show of strength or poor timing. A few smirked, others shifted uncomfortably. Across the room, however, it was different. You could see jaws clenching, hands tightening, brows furrowing. A woman in her 60s clutched her pearls like they were an anchor keeping her steady. A young college student 2 rows back pulled out his phone and whispered, "Did he just say that?" before hitting record. The contrast was electric. One half of the room frozen in shock, the other simmering with restrained anger. And then there was Obama. He didn't move forward. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he leaned back ever so slightly, resting one hand on his lap, straightening his jacket with the other. That small, deliberate gesture spoke louder than any outburst. It said, "I'm in control." For several long seconds, he said nothing, and yet the silence roared. People began whispering urgently. Voices cracked with anticipation. Is he going to respond? Did he hear it? What's he waiting for? Up in the press gallery, chaos unfolded. Reporters fumbled with laptops, tripping over their own words, struggling to describe history that was still unfolding in real time. Even the moderator, Professor Harold Stokes from Arizona State University, shifted in his chair, his knuckles whitening as his eyes darted between the two men. The camera zoomed closer. On Trump's face, tension disguised as smugness. On Obama's, calm, calculated control. "This is going to be everywhere by morning," whispered a local councilman seated near the front. The woman beside him didn't respond, her wide eyes locked on the stage. Trump, sensing the silence wasn't favoring him, leaned forward again and smirked into the microphone. "What? Did I say something wrong?" His voice dripped mockery, daring Obama to bite. But Obama didn't. He remained still, lips pressed into the faintest half-smile, tilting his head slightly as he stared directly at Trump. The crowd shifted in their seats, sensing something inevitable approaching, like the low rumble before a storm breaks. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was suspense. Even seasoned analysts weren't immune. A Fox News commentator leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "If he responds, this entire thing flips." Every eye locked on Obama. Even Trump, now tapping his fingers on the desk, couldn't escape the magnetic pull of that silence. And then, the smallest movement shattered everything. Obama reached for his glass of water. Slow, controlled, deliberate. The microphone caught the faint clink of ice shifting inside the glass. He raised it, took a single sip, and placed it back down as if each second had been rehearsed. That calmness, that restraint, was louder than shouting, louder than anger, louder than any comeback. Trump shifted again, tapping louder, glancing at the audience as if reminding them who held the title of president. But the longer Obama stayed silent, the more control he held over the room. "Why isn't he saying anything?" someone whispered near the front, voice breaking with both frustration and hope, because, another replied softly, "Sometimes silence wins." In real time, the power dynamic shifted. Every second Obama said nothing was another second Trump lost control of the stage. Up in the gallery, reporters stopped typing altogether. They, like everyone else, were waiting for the storm to break. The Press gallery stood frozen, fingers hovering over keyboards, waiting for Obama's first word. Cameramen leaned closer to their lenses, adjusting their focus. In the fourth row, a boy, no older than 12, tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad. What did he mean by boy? The father, eyes locked on Obama, whispered without looking away. You'll understand when you're older. Trump broke. First. The silence was too much for him. He leaned forward, irritation lacing his voice. What? No response? I thought you had something to say. His laugh followed, sharp, calculated, but it didn't land. It fell flat, scattering awkwardly, against walls that weren't on his side anymore. Then finally Obama moved, slowly, deliberately. He placed both hands on the table, leaned toward the microphone, and locked eyes with Trump. Not with anger, but with something sharper, something colder, a patience that cut deeper than rage. I'll respond, he said softly. 3 simple words, barely above a whisper, but they detonated through the crowd like a spark hitting dry tinder. Phones shot up higher, reporters snapped back into action. The silence fractured, but only slightly. Everyone leaned in, hanging on to what would come next, but Obama didn't rush. He eased back into his chair, letting the room breathe, letting Trump stew in his own anticipation. That restraint alone was a message. I won't play at your pace. In the third row, a cluster of high school students sat shoulder to shoulder, wide-eyed and unblinking. One whispered, "Man, he's about to cook him." Another nodded without, tearing his gaze from the stage. The moderator, Professor Harold Stokes, raised his hand as if to interject. "Gentlemen, if we can," but he stopped himself. This wasn't his moment to control. The country was watching something raw, something unscripted, and he knew better than to interfere. Obama glanced briefly toward Stokes, then back at Trump. He adjusted his tie, not nervously, but like a man arranging the stage on his own terms. Even the smallest movement stretched time, commanding the room without a single word. "You know," Obama began finally, his voice steady, deliberate. "I've been called a lot of things in my life." He paused. The words sank deep, hanging heavy in the silence. "But respect," he continued, "has never been something I've had to beg for." The hall erupted. Applause thundered through the room. People shot to their feet, palms cracking, against one another until they turned red. A black pastor in the front row raised his hand and shouted, "Amen." Trump rolled his eyes, muttered something under his breath, but the cameras caught it. "Give me a break." Obama raised his hand slightly, and the crowd quieted, still buzzing with energy, waiting for more. That pause wasn't just silence anymore. It was strategy. The words he was about to say now carried twice the weight because of it. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, irritation flashing in his eyes. He tried to cut in, but Obama didn't look at him. Not once. He looked at the audience, instead like they were the only ones who mattered. And in that moment, everyone knew. This wasn't about Trump anymore. It was bigger, deeper. Finally, Obama leaned in again. The hall fell silent instantly, not out of shock this time, but pure anticipation. You could almost hear the audience's collective heartbeat. "You see," he said, voice calm but piercing, "respect isn't handed out like a trophy. It's not tied to the office you hold or how loudly you can speak. Respect is earned." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Earned," he continued, "by the way you treat people, by the example you set when no one's watching, and most of all, by the way you listen." The crowd exploded again, the applause rolling like thunder through the hall. Trump shifted in his chair, jaw tightening, opening his mouth to interrupt, but his voice drowned under the roar. Obama leaned back, unfazed, letting the applause wash over the stage before continuing in the same measured tone. "Mr. President," he said, turning his gaze back to Trump, "I've been called many things in my life, some by people who didn't know me, some by people who didn't want to." He paused again, steady and unhurried. "But I learned a long time ago, when people resort to insults, it says more about their fear than it does about your worth." Sharp murmur rippled through the crowd. In the balcony, a man leaned forward, whispering, "He's cutting him," without even raising his voice. Trump's jaw flexed. He snatched his microphone and snapped, "Don't lecture me about respect, Barack. I'm the President of the United States." His words were forceful, but shaky, like a man grasping for control he'd already lost. Obama didn't flinch. He let the declaration hang, then replied, voice even and calm, "Yes, you are. And that's exactly why every word you speak carries weight." He leaned forward slightly, locking Trump in his gaze. "The title doesn't make you bigger than the people you serve. The title should remind you. Your job is to carry yourself in a way worthy of their trust." The line detonated the hall. Applause, whistles, even feet stomping against the floor. The moderator, hands raised halfway, gave up trying to contain the roar. The room belonged to Obama now, and everyone knew it. Even the moderator couldn't hide the faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Obama leaned in again, his voice low but unshaken. "You can demand someone sit down. You can try to shrink them with words. But the truth is, respect doesn't bow to commands." A woman in a bright red blazer, seated in the second row, shot to her feet and shouted, "Say that again." The hall roared in agreement, waves of applause rippling through the crowd. Obama gave a small, knowing smile before continuing, his tone steady, precise. "We teach our children that the measure of a man, or a woman, isn't how much power they can grab, but how they use the power they've been given. We tell them to be fair, to be honest, to lift people up but not tear them down." The words landed hard, deliberate. "Those lessons aren't complicated," Obama said, leaning slightly forward. "They're simple, and yet they mean everything when you're trusted to lead a nation." Trump couldn't hold back any longer. He cut in sharply, leaning toward his microphone. "Oh, please. You think lectures make you great? People didn't elect me to give sermons. They elected me to fight." Obama turned to face him directly this time, calm, focused, piercing. "You're right," he said evenly. "They didn't elect you to give sermons." A pause. The tension in the room thickened. "But they did elect you to lead," Obama continued, his voice gaining quiet strength. "And there's a difference. Fighting for yourself isn't leadership. Fighting for people who don't look like you, don't pray like you, don't agree with you, that's leadership." The hall detonated. Thunderous applause, whistles, and cheers ricocheted off the walls. Even a few Republican attendees who'd come to back Trump found themselves clapping despite hesitation, swept up in the momentum. Cameras captured everything. A young Latina student from Tucson wiped away tears, clutching her phone with trembling hands. An older white veteran clapped slowly, both hands steady, his eyes never leaving the stage. But Obama wasn't finished. He leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. "You see, Mr. President, the most powerful thing a leader can say isn't 'sit down,' it's 'stand up with me.'" For half a heartbeat, silence swallowed the hall. And then the explosion came. The ovation was deafening. People surged to their feet, clapping, shouting, cheering. The sound rolled like a wave, crashing against the walls and spilling into every corner of the room. Trump threw his hands up, muttering under his breath, "Oh, give me a break." But his words were drowned instantly by the roar of applause. He leaned back in his chair, visibly irritated, while Obama calmly folded his hands on the desk, letting the moment breathe. What nobody knew was that this wasn't the climax. It was the spark. The real story was only beginning. The energy in the Phoenix Convention Center was electric, uncontainable. The ovation didn't fade. It rolled in waves, one section erupting until another picked it up again like echoes refusing to die. The forum had transformed. This was no longer a simple discussion on race and leadership. The hall felt like a battleground, where words had become weapons and the audience was caught in the crossfire. On the left side of the stage, a group of young activists from Los Angeles leapt to their feet, chanting in unison, "Stand up with me, stand up with me." The phrase bounced off the high ceilings, multiplying in force as others joined in. But not everyone cheered. In the back rows, a cluster of Trump supporters rose defiantly, waving their red MAGA hats. One man, his salt and pepper beard framing, a hardened face shouted above the noise, his voice cutting briefly through the chaos. "Sit down, Obama. You had your time." His words were swallowed almost instantly by the thunderous response from the rest of the room. But the fracture they revealed was undeniable. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing their headlines would depend entirely on where they stood in this deepening divide. "This isn't just a forum anymore," whispered a journalist from the Arizona Republic to her colleague. "This is going to shape headlines for weeks." Down near the front, Reverend Harold Gaines from Detroit pressed his hand to his chest, tears glistening in his eyes. He leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, "That's the kind of dignity they can't strip from us. That's history speaking." 2 rows behind him, a Republican governor from Nebraska leaned forward, whispering to his aide, his voice low but tight. "He's making sense, and that scares me." The aide scribbled notes rapidly, knowing the governor's response here would affect his next press conference, maybe even his career. The divide wasn't just in the audience anymore. It lived on the stage. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, tapping his fingers against the desk, louder this time, the mic catching each frustrated beat. Beside him, Obama sat still, his hands folded, eyes scanning the crowd like a teacher checking to see if the lesson had landed. The moderator raised, his voice desperately trying to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's keep the discussion civil." His plea cracked mid-sentence, almost drowned by the competing waves of cheers and shouts. But the crowd wasn't calming down. Near the front, a college student from Arizona State shot to his feet, shouting, toward the stage, "Respect isn't about power, it's about character." Another eruption of applause followed instantly. From the opposite side, a Trump supporter yelled back, "We don't need lectures, we need fighters." Their voices clashed in the air, symbolic of something much larger, the divide splitting America in real time, right in front of the cameras. Fox News zoomed in on a young black girl holding her mother's hand tightly. Her wide eyes reflected both fear and awe. That single image, captured in that perfect tense moment, would later flood social media timelines across the country. CNN, meanwhile, kept its focus locked on Obama's composed face, the perfect counterpoint to Trump's visible frustration. Both networks were already shaping very different stories, and the nation was watching. 2 Americas, 2 realities. That's what it felt like as Fox News and CNN split-screened the night into opposing truths. Inside the Phoenix Convention Center, the moderator's voice cracked as he tried again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," but his plea was swallowed whole. The forum was no longer about policy or dialogue. It had transformed into something raw, something untamed. Emotion spilling uncontrollably from thousands who knew they were witnessing a moment bigger than politics. Trump leaned into his microphone, snapping sharply, "This isn't supposed to be a pep rally for Obama. I'm the president here, not him." His voice boomed across the hall. But instead of cheers, a wave of boos rolled back from pockets of the crowd. Obama didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his head slowly, deliberately, giving Trump the same calm, measured look he'd maintained since the start. Cameras zoomed in tight. That stare was power without words. The audience erupted again, applause filling the silence Trump had tried to command. Near the exits, security stiffened, shoulders squared, prepared for anything. The tension in the room was thick, not violent but charged, like a stadium split between rival teams, both unwilling to back down. And yet, as shouts and claps clashed in the air, one truth crystallized. The room wasn't united under either man. It was divided between 2 visions of leadership. For some, leadership meant force, command, domination. For others, it meant patience, dignity, restraint, and the cameras caught all of it. Every tear, every fist pump, every smirk. Millions, watching at home, weren't just hearing words. They were seeing a mirror of the nation itself. divided, defiant, loud, but unable to look away. But the real storm wasn't inside those walls. It was outside, in the world of headlines, hashtags, and viral clips. By the time the forum ended, the Phoenix night sky blazed with satellite trucks and camera lights. Reporters swarmed the convention center's entrances, shoving microphones into the faces of anyone stepping onto the sidewalk. Just steps from the doors, CNN's Jake Tapper was already live on air. Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed tonight wasn't just a political clash. It was a cultural earthquake. He turned to the camera, his tone steady, urgent. The president's words and President Obama's response are already dominating every platform. You can imagine. Across the street, Fox News set up under blazing lights, the convention center glowing behind them. Laura Ingraham, calm but firm, told her viewers, "This is being blown completely out of proportion. President Trump was simply speaking directly as he always does. The left wants to turn it into something racial." Meanwhile, MSNBC's Rachel Maddow leaned forward at her desk, her voice quiet but sharp as clips played behind her. "You cannot ignore the weight of those words. Sit down, boy. That wasn't a slip. That wasn't an accident." Behind her, the screen froze on Obama's response, and Maddow added, "And Barack Obama's calm, steady, dignified reply only underscored the stark difference between these two men." Back on the West Coast, chaos erupted inside Twitter's San Francisco headquarters. Moderators scrambled as hashtags exploded. Within an hour, "Sit Down Boy" shot to the top of U.S. trending, climbing fast toward the global #1 spot. Just beneath it, another wave gathered force. "Stand up with me," Obama's exact phrase from the stage, now a rallying cry. Clips from the confrontation flooded every platform. A balcony video uploaded by a college student captured the audience's collective gasp in crystal-clear sound. It racked up 3 million views on TikTok in under an hour. CNN's official post of Obama's respect line shattered numbers. 200,000 retweets in just 30 minutes. And then came the memes. Screenshots of Trump's crossed arms and tight jaw flooded Instagram and Reddit, captioned with lines like, "When the teacher calls you out in front of the whole class." Obama's calm stare was paired with quotes like, "Leadership doesn't yell, it teaches." The frenzy didn't stay online. Across the country, evening news anchors tore up their lineups to lead with the Phoenix showdown. Local station 12 News in Arizona cut away from monsoon storm coverage to replay the confrontation. In Boston, WBZ News opened its 11 p.m. broadcast with the clip, the anchor's tone measured but tinged with disbelief. Tonight, a moment in Arizona has the entire country talking. Even late-night hosts jumped in within hours. Jimmy Kimmel queued up the clip for his audience, who gasped, laughed, and then roared in applause at Obama's response. "I haven't seen someone get roasted that calmly," Kimmel joked, "since my mother told me I was a mistake." On the other coast, Stephen Colbert looked straight into the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't a comeback. That was a masterclass in leadership. But not every reaction was jokes. On Facebook, pastors, teachers, and community leaders posted heartfelt essays about what the moment meant. Reverend Lisa Harmon from Indianapolis wrote, "Obama reminded us that the strength of a leader isn't in tearing others down, but in showing restraint. That's the example our children need to see." Her post was shared 40,000 plus times in one night. Conservative commentators hit back hard. On Breitbart, the headline screamed, "Obama plays victim again. Mainstream media cheers." Fox's Sean Hannity fired up his viewers. "The left is trying to crown Obama a saint while ignoring the real issues. The president is a fighter, and fighters don't mince words." But no matter which channel you watched, no matter which feed you scrolled, one thing was unavoidable. That moment, Trump saying, "Sit down, boy." Obama pausing, adjusting his jacket, and replying with words that cut deeper than any insult. By 1 a.m. Eastern, Twitter's trending bar looked like a battlefield. Hashtags clashing in real time, a digital reflection of a country split in two, and the night was still young. "Respect is earned. Stand up with me." By dawn, Those 5 words had escaped the walls of the Phoenix Convention Center and set the country on fire. Analysts estimated that over 50 million people had already seen the clip within just a few hours. By morning, headlines blazed across the nation's front pages. The Washington Post, "Respect versus Power, Obama silences Trump with words." The Wall Street Journal, "Forum sparks political firestorm as Obama-Trump clash." Los Angeles Times, "Sit down, boy." The moment wasn't staying in Phoenix. It had invaded every living room, every phone, every conversation in America. The story no longer belonged to the 2 men on stage. It belonged to the people now. But while the public stayed glued to their screens, behind closed doors, the real fallout was just beginning. That night, inside the White House residence, the mood was volatile. Trump paced the length of the Lincoln sitting room carpet. His tie loosened, his face flushed. The TV blared in the background, tuned to Fox News, where Laura Ingraham defended him, though even her voice carried a rare strain. Trump jabbed his finger toward the screen, his voice sharp. "They're twisting it, twisting everything," he turned to his senior advisors clustered nearby. "I didn't mean it the way they're saying. Fake news and blowing this up again. I just told him to sit down." Jason Wilkes, one of his closest aides, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. President, with respect, the clip is everywhere. Social media isn't letting this go. Even some of our allies are struggling to spin it." Trump whipped his head around, eyes blazing. "Struggling? That's your job. Fix it. Get Hannity. Get Tucker. I want every outlet reminding people. Obama was the worst president in history. The economy, the jobs, the disasters, remind them all." He slapped his palm against the arm of a chair, his voice rising. They can't give him the win on this. Across the country, in a quiet Chicago hotel suite, Obama sat with his closest friends and former staffers. The TV was muted, but the scrolling captions replayed his response line by line. Valerie Jarrett leaned forward on the sofa, her voice soft but steady. "Barack, that was something else. You didn't just answer him. You showed the contrast without raising your voice." Obama rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. "I didn't go there tonight to spar," he said quietly. "I went to talk about leadership, where we're headed as a country," but he made it about respect. He paused, leaning back in his chair. "And maybe that's what people needed to see." Near the window, David Plouffe glanced up from his phone, his screen glowing in the dim light. "The reaction is massive," he said, tapping furiously. "Trending globally, hashtags everywhere. People, especially young people, are repeating your line like it's a mantra. Stand up with me." He looked up, wide-eyed. "I haven't seen this kind of organic energy since Yes We Can." Obama chuckled softly but shook his head. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm not running for anything." He sighed. "But if the message sticks, if people start talking about dignity and respect in their daily lives, maybe it's worth the firestorm." Michelle, quiet until now, finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "Barack, it wasn't just about the message. It was about the way you handled yourself. You didn't let him drag you down. Kids are watching this. Families are watching this. They need to see that composure matters." Obama nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Back in Washington, the phones wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls poured into the White House switchboard from Republican senators. Some offered public lines of support, but privately their warnings were blunt. Senator Alan Briggs of Ohio didn't mince words. "Mr. President, that phrase won't play well in the suburbs. You've got to walk it back, or it'll haunt you." Trump scoffed, waving the advice away. "Walk it back? Never. That's weakness. People elected me because I don't apologize. I double down." He grabbed a pen, scrawling across a notepad. "Draft me a tweet. We're not playing defense. We hit back harder." Back in Obama's suite, Valerie Jarrett scrolled through a flood of notifications, reading aloud reactions pouring in from across the country. Pastor Williams in Baltimore says he's using your words in Sunday's sermon, she said. A teacher in Dallas posted a video of her class watching the clip, and even a few conservative commentators are calling your response classy. Obama leaned back, thoughtful, his voice quiet but firm. This isn't about me. It's about the kind of behavior we normalize. If a president can speak like that without consequence, what message does it send? Not just to adults, but to the kids watching who'll think that's how leaders act. Michelle nodded sharply. That's why tonight mattered. Not because of politics, but because it drew a line. Respect isn't optional. It's essential. By 2 a.m., Trump's strategy went live. Tweets fired from his official account one after another. Fake news twisting my words. Obama's weak reply won't fix the disaster he left behind. Within minutes, his supporters retweeted thousands of times. But for every loyalist amplifying his defense, there were 10 more voices sharing Obama's clip, captioned, "This is what leadership looks like." Behind closed doors, the contrast couldn't have been clearer. Trump's team scrambled, panicked but aggressive, fighting to control the narrative. Obama's circle stayed calm, deliberate, confident, because they understood something Trump's advisors didn't. They didn't have to chase the story. The story was chasing them, and by morning the real measure of this clash wouldn't come from pundits or politicians. It would come from ordinary Americans waking up, reading the headlines and deciding for themselves. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the question wasn't about two men anymore. It was about two versions of leadership. And which one America wanted to believe in. The conversation had spilled far beyond Phoenix, beyond the White House, beyond Obama's quiet Chicago suite. It had reached kitchens, coffee shops, bus stops, factory floors, and classrooms across the nation. Ordinary people, folks who usually kept politics at arm's length, were suddenly debating leadership, dignity, and respect like their lives depended on it. In a small diner off Interstate 71 in Columbus, Ohio, the television above the counter replayed the clip on loop. Truckers and factory workers hunched over steaming mugs of coffee, their eyes locked on the screen. "That was cold," a man in a faded camouflage jacket muttered. He didn't even have to raise his voice. A waitress wiping down the counter chimed in softly, "My kids watched it this morning before school. They said Obama looked like a teacher scolding the class." She paused, shaking her head. "And they're right. He did it without yelling." In Dallas, a high school teacher rolled a television into her classroom and pressed play. The room fell silent as Obama's calm response washed over the screen. When the video ended, a quiet boy in the back raised his hand hesitantly. Why did he call him boy? My grandpa used to say that word was never just about being young." The teacher took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "That's exactly the conversation we need to have. Words matter, and a leader's words matter most of all." In Detroit, Reverend Harold Gaines, who had attended the Phoenix Forum himself, addressed his congregation that Sunday. He stood at the pulpit, voice rising as he quoted Obama's line, "Respect doesn't bow to commands." The crowd clapped, some leaping to their feet as Gaines thundered, "Dignity is not granted by office, it is shown by character." A volunteer uploaded the sermon to Facebook. By that evening, the video had surpassed 2 million views. In rural Montana, local news caught up with Clyde, a retired farmer in a worn John Deere cap outside a hardware store. "I didn't vote for Obama. Never did," he admitted, adjusting his hat. "But I'll say this. He carried himself better than I've seen in a long time." The other guy looked rattled. The clip struck a chord online, especially with independents tired of partisan shouting matches. College campuses buzzed with energy. At the University of Michigan, students gathered for an impromptu rally on the quad, waving handmade signs reading, "Stand up with me." Videos of hundreds chanting the phrase flooded TikTok, millions watching as a movement quietly began. "This isn't about politics," a student shouted into a bullhorn. "This is about how leaders treat people. That's the standard we should all demand." Not everyone cheered Obama's composure. In Alabama, a local radio host told his listeners, "The media's painting Obama as a saint. But let's not forget, he's not the president. Trump is, and Trump doesn't back down." Calls poured into the station, some supportive, others furious. But one thing was certain. Everyone had seen the clip, even in workplaces far removed. From politics, the moment dominated conversations. At a steel plant in Gary, Indiana, workers debated during lunch break. One man, hands blackened with soot, shook his head. "I don't care who you vote for. If my boss talked to me the way Trump talked to him, I'd quit on the spot," another worker shot back. "But that's Trump, he's a fighter." People like that. The break room erupted in laughter, frustration, and passionate back and forths, proving just how deeply the clash had burrowed into everyday American life. Stories poured out from ordinary Americans. A single mother in Albuquerque tweeted, "My 12-year-old daughter asked me why the president called Obama boy. I had to explain a history she shouldn't have to carry. Thank you, Obama, for showing her that strength looks like calm." Her post was retweeted thousands of times. In Miami, Univision interviewed an elderly Cuban-American man outside his apartment. Switching between Spanish and English, he said softly, "Obama showed what real leadership is. Calm, dignity. That's what I want for my grandchildren." His words resonated deeply with viewers exhausted by constant chaos in politics. The divide wasn't neat. Some conservatives admitted respect for Obama's composure. Some liberals focused more on Trump's language than Obama's restraint. But the common thread was undeniable. America was talking about words, talking about respect, talking about what leadership should look like. By Monday morning, the impact was measurable. A Reuters Snap poll revealed something stunning. 62% of Americans, including 35% of Republicans, believed Obama had handled himself with more dignity than Trump during the forum. The numbers rattled Washington. The political fallout intensifies by dawn. Lawmakers were scrambling to read the public mood. Cable news tickers screamed phrases like "forum fallout" and "respect versus power." On Capitol Hill, chaos brewed. Reporters crowded the Russell Building steps, microphones thrust into lawmakers' faces as they arrived. "Senator, what did you think of the president's remark?" became the question of the morning. Senator Caroline Haskins of Vermont didn't hesitate, her voice firm and deliberate as cameras rolled. "That comment was unacceptable. Full stop." It demeaned not only President Obama, but millions of Americans who saw themselves in that moment. Leadership, Senator Caroline Haskins had said, is about lifting people up, not tearing them down. Her clip played on repeat across major networks, her tone calm but biting, slicing through the noise. On the other side, Senator Rick Dalworth of Florida offered a different take. "The president speaks directly, and sometimes that ruffles feathers," he said smoothly. "But I think the media is inflating this beyond reason. Let's focus on policies, not personalities." Yet even as he spoke, his eyes darted nervously toward the wall of cameras. He knew the clip had power, the kind of power you couldn't spin away. In the House, younger lawmakers made their voices louder than anyone expected. Representative Aaliyah Brooks from Minnesota tweeted late that night, "Respect is not optional. Every child watching that forum learned more from Obama's restraint than from Trump's outburst. We must demand better." Within hours, her post hit 1 million likes. Meanwhile, Republicans in vulnerable districts scrambled. Congressman Paul McKenna of Pennsylvania released a carefully worded statement. "I don't agree with the phrasing," he wrote cautiously, "but I continue to support the president's overall leadership." It was a tightrope act, a desperate attempt to please both sides. Local papers mocked it as spineless. Behind closed doors, GOP strategists were in panic mode. A leaked Republican National Committee memo warned candidates, avoid repeating or defending the president's exact phrasing. Pivot to the economy, security, or Biden criticism wherever possible. When the memo itself leaked to Politico, it sparked yet another furious news cycle. Democrats, meanwhile, smelled opportunity. House Speaker Linda Navarro held a press conference on the Capitol steps, flanked by civil rights leaders. This moment, she declared, goes beyond politics. It's about the example we set for our children. President Obama showed grace. President Trump showed disrespect. The contrast, she said firmly, couldn't be clearer. Navarro's words reframed the clash as something bigger than a partisan spat. It was a moral test. Cable news only fanned the flames. CNN replayed Obama's line on an endless loop. The title doesn't make you bigger than the people you serve. They labeled it the quote of the decade. Fox News countered aggressively, bringing on guests to insist Trump was merely asserting authority. MSNBC, meanwhile, invited historians who drew comparisons to Lincoln, Kennedy, and FDR, saying Obama's composure will be studied for decades. But perhaps the most seismic shift came when a group of Republican senators, long known for their unwavering loyalty to Trump, broke ranks. Senator Jonathan Keene of Arizona faced reporters and chose his words carefully. Words matter, he said. We all know the history of that word. It shouldn't have been used. We can back the president on policy, but we should also be honest about mistakes. It was the closest thing to open criticism yet, and it sent shockwaves through the conservative base. Across the country, advocacy groups jumped into action. The NAACP released a statement praising Obama's measured and powerful response, while calling on Trump to apologize. Civil rights attorneys filled morning shows, explaining the painful history of the word boy in America. Even within evangelical circles, divisions deepened. Some pastors defended Trump's bluntness, but others, like Reverend Thomas Ellery of Tennessee, delivered a different message to his congregation. Leadership without respect is not leadership at all. The White House struggles to contain. The fire inside the White House, the communications team scrambled to rewrite the narrative. Press Secretary Dana Hollis faced a barrage of questions at the daily briefing. The president uses plain language, she said curtly. It wasn't meant the way some are spinning it. Let's not get distracted by sound bites. But as reporters shouted follow-up questions, the briefing spiraled into chaos. Meanwhile, Obama stayed silent. He issued no statement, gave no interviews, didn't even tweet. His silence became its own story. NBC's Chuck Todd put it bluntly, the more Obama says nothing, the louder his response from that stage becomes. By Tuesday, late-night comedians were still milking the moment, but lawmakers were taking it dead seriously. Committees referenced the clash during hearings. One congresswoman even quoted Obama's line on the House floor, earning applause. What started as a cultural flashpoint was bleeding into policy debates, seeping into the daily grind of Washington's machinery. But outside the Beltway, something deeper was happening. Schools, churches, barbershops, living rooms. Across the country, Obama's words had slipped into the bloodstream of America. At Jefferson High School in Phoenix, just miles from the Forum, social studies teacher opened her class by projecting the video onto the whiteboard. Some students had family members who'd attended the Forum. They sat in rapt silence. When Obama said, "Respect isn't demanded by a title, it's earned through conduct." One student quietly scribbled the line into the margins of his notebook. The teacher paused the video and said softly, "That, right there, is why words matter. That's leadership. No shouting, no insults, just truth." In a small church in Birmingham, Alabama, Reverend Miriam Tate stood before her congregation the following Sunday. She raised a Bible in one hand and her phone in the other, the screen frozen on Obama's clip. "Brothers and sisters," she said, her voice carrying through the sanctuary, "when a man refuses to lower himself to anger, but instead calls us to rise higher, that's a lesson worth remembering." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Respect doesn't bow to commands. It lives in how we carry ourselves. The congregation erupted into a standing ovation. some cheering louder than they ever had inside that sanctuary before. Meanwhile, in Sacramento, California, a group of middle school students turned the phrase, "Stand up with me," into a massive banner and hung it across their cafeteria wall. Their principal, caught off guard, admitted to a local reporter, "I've never seen kids take a political moment and make it their own like this. Most of them weren't even alive when Obama was first elected. But they get it." Photos of the banner went viral overnight, praised as proof that the moment was already shaping the next generation. Even workplaces took notice. At a hospital in St. Louis, a supervisor opened a staff meeting by quoting Obama's line, "Fighting for people who don't look like you, that's leadership." Doctors and nurses nodded silently, exchanging looks that said more than words could. For a brief moment, the chaos of the hospital floor paused, replaced by reflection. In rural Kansas, a farmer interviewed on NPR spoke plainly. "I'm not much for politics," he said, his voice steady. "But when Obama said respect is earned, that hit home. Out here, you treat your neighbors right, or you won't have neighbors for long. That's just life." His simple words ricocheted across social media, resonating far beyond party lines. For younger generations, the clip wasn't just politics. It was content. On TikTok, teens remixed Obama's words into motivational videos, layered over cinematic music, ranging from gospel choirs to trap beats. One video paired a montage of student athletes training with Obama's line, "Respect comes when you stand for something greater than yourself." It exploded past 10 million views in 2 days. But the most striking proof of the moment's reach came from family dinner tables. In Milwaukee, a mother recalled her 9-year-old son asking during dinner, "Mom, why was the president so mean?" To Mr. Obama, she admitted she struggled to explain the weight of the word boy without overwhelming him. "But then I showed him Obama's response," she said softly, "and I told him, that's what strength looks like. Calm, patient, firm." Not everyone saw it that way, of course. Conservative talk radio hosts railed against what they called Obama hero worship. One Oklahoma host sneered, "If rolling your eyes and giving a lecture counts as leadership, then every teacher in America is the next president." But their mockery only underscored the moment's reach, because even critics couldn't stop talking about it. Teachers were quoting Obama in classrooms. Pastors were weaving his words into sermons. Parents were turning it into lessons on dignity, and teenagers were turning it into art. The message had stretched into spaces where politics rarely entered, and it was sticking. As the cultural wave grew, the real lesson started to crystallize. This wasn't just about one forum or one clash. It was about defining what leadership means, not just for today, but for generations to come. By the end of the week, the noise hadn't quieted. Clips still rolled endlessly on television. Hashtags still lit up screens. Commentators dissected the exchange like it was a turning point in American history. But beyond the chatter, something deeper had settled in. People weren't just replaying what Trump had said, or how Obama had answered. They were wrestling with the meaning of it. In Springfield, Missouri, a father sat at the kitchen table with his teenage daughter as she replayed the clip on her phone. "Dad," she asked, "why didn't Obama yell back? If someone said that to you, wouldn't you be mad?" He thought for a moment before replying, "Sure, I'd be mad, but that's why what he did was stronger. He showed you don't have to scream to win. Sometimes, calm cuts deeper." His daughter nodded slowly, the lesson sinking in. That same night in Los Angeles, a group of community organizers held a town hall. Instead of debating their usual agenda, housing, crime, ordinances, they opened the meeting by playing Obama's words. "The most powerful thing a leader can say isn't sit down, it's stand up with me." A woman in the back stood and said firmly, "That's what we need in this neighborhood. Leaders who invite us in, not push us out." The room erupted in applause. For the first time in weeks, the organizers left, feeling unified around something larger than policy. In a suburban library in Wisconsin, a book club spiraled into an impromptu debate about the moment. "I don't agree with all of Obama's politics," one retiree admitted. "But my goodness, he showed restraint. That's character." Across from her, another member shook her head. "Trump was elected because he fights. Some people like that toughness." A third voice cut in gently. "Fighting isn't the same as leading. That's what Obama showed us." The conversation ended without agreement, but with something rarer: thoughtfulness. By Friday, even schools that rarely touched politics were embracing the lesson. In a fifth-grade classroom in Phoenix, students were asked to write essays about what leadership meant to them. One child's paper, shared online by the teacher, read simply, "Leaders don't make people feel small. They make people feel tall." The post went viral, proof that even children had understood the heart of the moment. Meanwhile, Obama's silence after the forum became a story in itself. He didn't tour the networks. He didn't send tweets. He let his words do the work. That restraint became as powerful as the reply itself. By contrast, Trump doubled down, flooding interviews, tweets, and statements, all brimming with defiance. Trump's supporters rallied loudly, but even many of them admitted privately the exchange had left a mark. Historians began weighing in almost immediately. One writer in The Atlantic explained it perfectly. Moments like these are less about immediate politics and more about the cultural memory they create. They predicted that a decade from now, students would read about this clash, not for its effect on Trump or Obama politically, but for what it revealed about America's struggle. With respect, with leadership, with identity. In churches, classrooms, workplaces, and homes, the words had taken on a life of their own. Obama's response was no longer about him. It was about anyone who had ever been told to sit down, to be quiet, to accept disrespect. It became about the choice we all face. Do you answer rage with rage? Or do you respond with dignity? And maybe that was the lesson America couldn't ignore. Leadership, Obama reminded a nation, isn't about how loudly you command. It isn't about belittling others to prove your strength. True leadership is measured. Restraint, holding your ground without losing your composure. Patience, waiting for the right moment to speak. Dignity, reminding others of their worth, without shouting them down. In that Phoenix hall, under the cameras, the lights, and the weight of millions of watching eyes, Obama gave America a reminder: respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. For viewers, for citizens, for anyone watching from afar, this story wasn't just about two men standing on a stage. It was about us, about the kind of example we want for our children, about the kind of leaders we choose to follow. Because moments like this aren't just political. They become mirrors, forcing a country to confront itself. So if you take anything from that moment, let it be this: words matter. How you respond to disrespect matters even more. And sometimes when the world tells you to sit down, real strength is in inviting others to stand up with me. Thank you for watching this story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think about leadership, dignity, and the example you want to set, subscribe. Because there are more stories to come. Stories that matter. Stories that remind us who we are and who we can be.